Hello and welcome to Who's the Bossk? It's a Star Wars podcast from laughingplace.com. My name is Mike Celestino. I am your host. I am the lead Southern California reporter and editorial director for Star Wars content at Laughing Place. This is episode number 152 of Who's the Bossk, and we will be discussing the season 3 finale of The Mandalorian, the smash hit live action Star Wars TV series on Disney Plus. And for that conversation, I have invited on the show for the first time my friend and fellow podcaster, Justin J. Smith. Justin, thank you for doing the show. Thank you for taking some time out of your week to come and chat with me about Star Wars. How are you?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for inviting me. I love Who's the Bossk.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for listening and thanks for coming on. And thank you for having me on your podcast. I guess it was close to 4 or 5 months ago that I
Yeah,
did.
it was December 17th, the day before Steven Spielberg's birthday.
That's right. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your podcast. It's called Downtown Toontown. What is the premise of this podcast?
Well, Downtown Toontown, I've been wanting to do a Disney podcast for pretty much forever since they started doing it. I was always trying to find a way to sort of get in. I was thinking maybe I could, and around 2020 was when I was thinking, okay, I put off this long enough. I got to start doing something.
Yeah.
So I was looking at maybe doing Lucasfilm, maybe doing Spielberg films. I was going down the list. And, in the back of my mind, I was thinking maybe Touchstone films. And, like one episode I always wanted to do was Roger Rabbit, because that's like a top 5 favorite film sort of thing. I was like thinking, I was just thinking of like episodes at the back of my mind. And then all of a sudden I thought, no one's really doing a Roger Rabbit podcast. So, and, Roger Rabbit was about to come on like 4K. So I was sort of thinking all these things in the back of my mind. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to create a whole Downtown Toontown like podcast. And, Toontown was closing, as you know, at Disneyland. So it was all adding up. I created Downtown Toontown. The very first guest, I actually asked my Facebook friend, Mr. Gary K. Wolf, who created Roger Rabbit. He was my first guest that I interviewed.
That's amazing.
And all of a sudden I had 3 episodes and I'm like, I guess I'm a podcaster now. So that was sort of how Downtown Toontown came to be. I've interviewed a number of people in the Disney community now, and I just released an episode this week. We do talk about, yes, it is focused on Roger Rabbit and Disney, but it's also animation in general. Because, what's so cool about Roger Rabbit is that it has Looney Tunes in there. There's Spielberg produced it. Lucas, Industrial Light Magic did the effects. So a bunch of like different factions come into that movie, and I get to talk about a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, it's a great idea. It's like you said, something that nobody else had been doing, at least that we're aware of. And then in the fall of last year, you were kind enough to reach out to me and invite me to come on the show to talk about Steven Spielberg and his entire filmography, which we ended up having, what was it, Justin, like 2.5 hours?
2.5 hours.
Yeah, just going through his entire filmography, which honestly was a blast. Like, I loved revisiting all that stuff. I rewatched a couple of the movies. I watched one for the first time that I'd never seen before. But that whole episode was just really a lot of fun to do. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that episode?
I had a blast too. I'm glad to hear you had a blast. I did sort of want to do a quick course correct. I mean, I don't know how many people actually listen to all 2.5 hours. I know some people who listen to a little bit of it and then, maybe had to go to work. But I did sort of want to correct. I think I mentioned that, when we talked about Temple of Doom, I said it was the film that helped inspire the PG-13 rating. And you asked, like, what was the first? And I said, I think it's Down and Out in Beverly Hills.
Okay.
That was actually the first R-rated Touchstone film. So I was just confusing my stats wrong. The first PG-13 film was, the John Milius movie.
Oh gosh, I'm blanking on it now too.
Maverick.
Okay.
the Red Dawn. Wolverines.
Right.
Wolverines was what I was thinking. Yeah.
With Patrick Swayze, Red Dawn.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the first PG-13 movie. I know that's such a small little detail, but for all the Mike Celestino and Justin Smith fans listening, I wanted to correct
Okay.
the misinformation, the fake news.
Yeah, but listen, seriously, if you're a fan of this show and you like hearing me talk, go and listen to that episode. It's a 2.5 hour discussion of Steven Spielberg. We had a lot of fun doing it. And then, yeah, stick around and check out the rest of Downtown Toontown. I haven't listened to all your episodes, but I am a fan of the concept, and I'm going to continue going through your podcast as well whenever I get the chance. So very cool. Check that out, Downtown Toontown. And I'm guessing that's available wherever podcasts are available, right, Justin?
It is.
Okay. You also on your Twitter bio, it says you're involved with the Glendale International Film Festival. I wanted to ask you about that. What have you been doing for them?
Well, I was sort of in between jobs in 2017, and I sort of volunteered, because I have a aunt and uncle who live in Glendale. So I just, I like you. I'm a film buff. You went to film school. I've taken some classes, so I've all trying to break into the industries was always sort of a interest of mine, and was trying to find a career. And I thought, I had some time, and that's how I started. And then, I did it again the next year, sort of thing, next year. And then 2020 happened, which,
Yeah,
as you know, was kind of an eventful year, let's just say. And for a number of reasons. For one, we had the very first virtual film festival for Glendale, the International Film Festival. And the founder of the festival, my friend Velvet Rhodes, passed away. And as a result, we sort of got the board, and we sort of talked what should we do. And the board actually elected me as the president of the Glendale International Film Festival. So
what? That's crazy.
Yeah. So for 2 years, I ran the biggest film festival in Glendale, California.
That's awesome. So is that happening this year?
It is right now. I mean, I won't be I've been president for 2 years. I've sort of stepped down, and we've sort of teamed up with Glendale Arts, but yes, they are sort of getting the ball rolling. I'm seeing some films are being submitted. And yeah, if you're an indie filmmaker, I mean, you could be local to Southern California, but really anywhere in the world, because we have filmmakers from films submitted from China, from Israel, from all over the world. It's the Glendale International Film Festival. So if you want to, you're a filmmaker, you want your voice heard, check us out. Go to Film Freeway and, submit. We're happy to really grow our audience.
Cool. I'll keep that in mind. Every once in a while, I still like to put in the effort and make them. As you know, it's a lot of work to make a movie, even a short movie. So
have you made like short films recently, or
the last one I did was I did a Star Wars kind of fan film for the Galactic Star Cruiser. And that was a year ago. So I haven't, but I've written something recently that I kind of want to get off the ground. So hopefully if it's ever finished, I'll submit to you guys to the Glendale Film Festival too.
Well, we would have really appreciated it. I know. Yeah, we accept scripts too. And yeah, I mean, I did see your music video.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Robert and I made some music videos about a decade ago. We were really trying to turn that into a business. It never really became profitable for us, but we did make a handful of music videos. Yes. Okay. That's going to bring us to, actually, I want to mention that we are recording live on the Laughing Place YouTube channel. I'll just say hi to DJ Vanier. There, he said hello. But yeah, if you're watching and you would like to comment, we'll be happy to address any questions or concerns you may have. But let's get into something called the 5 Star Wars questions. This is something we do on the show that gives us kind of a baseline for our guests' Star Wars fandom.
I have a sort of surprise guest.
Oh gosh, you got Grogu is coming in to say hello. Hi, Grogu. So Justin, you ready for the 5 Star Wars questions?
All right, let's do it.
Okay. Number 1 of the 5 Star Wars questions. What is your earliest Star Wars memory?
1997, first grade. this obnoxious fellow pupil of mine wouldn't stop talking about Star Wars. You know, I was a kid who loved cartoons. That was my thing. Like I loved Disney. You know, I grew up in California. I went to Disneyland. You know, I'm an animation guy, as you know, the podcast, you know, sort of thing.
Right.
So I was not really familiar with Star Wars. I actually didn't really like live action films. As a little kid, I would like call live action films adult films because, you know,
Right.
I remember like saying that. So, you know, if it wasn't animation, it would always be the only films I really saw would be like that I actually liked would be live action films that had animation, like Mary Poppins or Roger Rabbit or God forbid Space Jam, even. So, you know, like, yeah, I mean, but this kid, he just loves Star Wars. He always talked about it. And I just remember sort of like, okay, sort of thing. And then I remember like seeing a commercial on television for like the Lego sets. This was, you know, about the time of the special editions, as you know. So Star Wars was sort of getting back in the public consciousness and all
Hmm.
that, you know. Like, of course, there was already hype on the early days of the internet about George Lucas is making another Star Wars. So Star Wars was getting back. And then, you know, I just, you know, because I saw it on TV and this kid, I asked my dad, do you know of this thing called Star Wars? And he got excited, like, yeah, I think you're like the right age to see it. So that's when I was like, okay, if my dad is into this thing, this Star Wars thing sounds pretty big, I guess, you know. So we actually went to Blockbuster. Now, for the younger kids listening out there, Blockbuster was this store where there was no streaming services back in those days. To see a movie, you had to go to the store and rent it if
Yes.
you didn't already own it on a physical copy. But yeah, we rented Star Wars on VHS, and it was the very first Star Wars, I would say, was the first live action film I actually saw and enjoyed.
Wow.
I loved that movie, and you know, I mean, I especially loved the droids, R2D2 and C3PO
Yeah.
sort of thing. So yeah, I did eventually, you know, I do remember like saying, "Oh yeah," to that kid. Yeah, I did eventually see Star Wars. So another, you know, in hindsight, looking back, that really annoying kid sort of gave me preparation for the Star Wars fandom. Like sometimes they can be annoying,
Right.
but the movies themselves, especially that first one, especially that original trilogy, it lives up to the hype. It's a
Yeah.
good product standing on its own.
Agreed. And yeah, that's a really good first memory to have it be the first live action film that you enjoyed. Yeah, that's gonna make an impression on you. Let's get into number two here. Who is your Oh, okay. So as an adult now, in your current age, what is your current favorite Star Wars movie or TV show and why?
You know, I mean, the go-to answer for everyone is Empire, but you know, I got to champion, you know, Star Wars that now episode 4 A New
Mhm.
Hope. It wasn't called that in 77, but you
Right.
know, that's the go-to thing. Cuz you know, no matter how big the fandom gets, no matter how many new shows, no matter how tiring it could be, you know, you just watch that original Star Wars. It holds up. That first film, you know, I almost don't even like feel like I need more. Like it just has a perfect beginning, middle, and end. You know,
Yeah.
it establishes everything well. It's very well edited. I mean, that first film, like, you know, that's always just sort of a go-to one. Like, I don't, you know, even Empire, because it ends on a cliffhanger, you kind of feel like, I guess I gotta see Return of the Jedi.
Right.
Not that I don't not like that films, or it's just that, you know, there's just so much content anymore, and you know, there's only so much time. You know, with A New Hope, it's just a great standalone film, which sort of has gotten lost the bigger Star Wars has gotten. But you know, I'm old fashioned. I just love a good old movie, and you know, Star Wars, you know, was a smash hit for a reason.
Sure.
But I
And
will
yeah.
also add that I do have also nostalgic memories of like Revenge of the Sith. That was a film I really enjoyed.
Okay. Yeah. I think we've said on this podcast before that there's some crazy alternate history out there somewhere where Star Wars, the original film, was not a success, but it became like this cult thing that everybody who saw it really loved and stood on its own in that way. But we live in the timeline where it became this massive multimedia franchise that keeps going and going. But
And
either way,
George Lucas
yeah,
became an avant-garde filmmaker
that's right. Yeah, he's making those movies that no one is allowed to see, maybe. Uh,
in his
number,
personal
yeah,
garage.
in his garage, right? Number 3, who is your favorite Star Wars character and why?
Oh gosh. Well, as a kid and really most teens, it would have been R2D2. I just loved the droids a lot.
Mhm.
It was really exciting last year. I got to meet very briefly Anthony Daniels at Star
Nice.
Wars Celebration. That was like exciting that I got to meet the only guy who was in all 11 Star Wars movies. And,
Mhm.
like arguably no one means Star Wars to him more than like him. He's been a part of everything, the movies and Star Tours, etc.
Yeah, he's
Um,
been very protective of that character and has played him in, like you said, every medium that there is.
yeah. And the older I've gotten, how can you not love Han Solo, Han and Chewie, love those characters in the Millennium Falcon. But yeah, I would say those are probably my go-to favorites.
Nice. I want to acknowledge Skywalking Through Neverland, our pals over there at one of my favorite Star Wars podcasts, saying hi, and we are apparently two of their favorite people. So thank
Well,
you for that.
well, I'll just say that they're gonna come into my story when we talk about the Mandalorian, but
Okay, great. So stay tuned. You can't turn off the stream there, Skywalking Through Neverland. All right, number 4. If you lived in the Star Wars universe, in the fictional Star Wars universe, where would you fit in? What faction do you think you would belong to? And the examples I always list: the Jedi Order, the Sith, the Rebel Alliance, the Empire, the Bounty Hunters, the Scum and Villainy, hanging out in the cantina, or anything else you can come up with. What do you think, Justin?
When I was preparing to go on this podcast, I knew you were going to ask this question. I thought, how should I answer? And I like the guy who you once interviewed, who was like, people always say, "Oh, I would like be in, an X-wing fighter." If you're not in the military in this real life, no, you wouldn't.
Right, right, right.
So, so yeah, like thinking about like my life and how I would fit in the Star Wars thing, like you know, I talked about the film festival. I talked about, I do a podcast. I do like creative things, but I also have like a real job, make money. So like I would probably be a smuggler like Solo. Like I would like do some off like, sort of not empire, but sort of like jobs to like get some credits sort of thing, sort of support myself. And then I would have aspirations to be Max Rebo. Basically, I would want to break in and be in an entertainment.
And are you a musician? Do you know an instrument or perform it in any way like that
When
capacity?
I was in high school, I played the
Okay,
clarinet.
fair enough. I think that's close, and it's certainly one of those instruments in the cantina band is close
Yeah.
to a clarinet.
And,
But yeah,
I actually like bought like some like John Williams like, music for the clarinet sort of thing. And I try to, teach myself the cantina band music.
okay. How did that go?
Yeah,
Pretty good.
yeah, pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, I think I had that experience as well, trying to teach myself John Williams music on keyboard or whatever, and I was never very good at it. But it's fun to try. Number 5, it's called Impression or Possession, and this is where my guests can choose to either do a Star Wars impression or simply tell me about a favorite Star Wars possession they may own. What do you think, Justin? Which one will it be?
You know what? I'll go with possession. I
Okay.
mean, we're doing the, people listening this may be listening to the audio, but we are on video now. So,
Yes.
I mean, I'm not really like a Star Wars collector in the sense like I don't have like the original 77 Kenner toys. I'm not Rancho Obi-Wan. I don't, I have a lot of like collectibles like Star Wars. I never like was never something I had to buy all the toys. Like I was never too obsessive.
Yeah.
But when I went to the Disney parks, pretty recently, I did have to get the Kamado case,
Yeah.
which
Kim
I'm
Tona.
sure your listeners know all about
Yes.
its history. I mean, they talked about it at Disney Gallery, but the sort of ice cream maker that the Mandalorian sort of redid as the Kamado case, where it was revealed it holds, it's basically a little safe, a portable safe, pretty much.
So I bought that as well for myself. It came out about a year ago. I think it was around the time of Celebration last year that it started popping up in the parks. And I promptly forgot the combination that I programmed into it. So I don't know if I'm able to open mine. Um,
Hopefully, you didn't put anything too valuable in it.
well, the thing is, as you also know, in Doc Ondar's Den of Antiquities, they were selling all the currencies. You could buy all the different Star Wars currencies. And I thought, what better place to store the currencies than inside the Camtono? So if I want to retrieve those, I got to figure out how to open that thing. But yeah, it's a very cool little safe that you can program your own little combination into. So I think you can still get that at Doc Ondar's in Galaxy's Edge. Okay, that's the end of the 5 Star Wars questions. I actually have a special thing I want to throw to now. That if you're watching the live stream, you're not going to hear this, but I will say, if you would like to hear this, go and listen to this episode later on in audio form. This is a phone call that I received earlier that I recorded. And I just thought it was interesting and strange that I got this phone call. So I'm going to play this phone call right now in the audio version of this podcast.
Okay.
And that was my very strange phone call that I received out of the blue. So thank you for calling to that special surprise guest. And to find out who that is, if you're watching live on the Laughing Place YouTube channel, tune in later when the audio version of this podcast goes up. But that's going to bring us to Star Wars headlines for this week. Let's see, not a big week for headlines because we were coming out of Star Wars Celebration and had all that news the previous week. So just a few little tidbits this week. One of them is the actor Wes Chatham from The Hunger Games and Tenet has joined the cast of Ahsoka. Now, do you know who this actor is, Justin? And are you excited for Ahsoka as a show?
I know who Ahsoka is. I mean, of course, I've seen The Mandalorian, so I've seen Dawson's sort of portrayal, sort of thing.
Right.
Um, I recognized a couple of the movies she's been in, or I don't really know the actor.
You don't know the actor Wes Chatham. I don't really know who that is either.
Yeah.
But he has joined the cast. That was news that came out this past week, so we'll look forward to the show. And then Damon Lindelof, he's a writer. He was the co-showrunner of Lost. He's written a bunch of movies, and he did that show, The Leftovers on HBO, that I really loved. And he was writing one of the new Star Wars movies that got announced. It's the one that Daisy Ridley is going to be in with the new Jedi Order, but he left the project actually before it was officially announced, and he finally officially commented on it, that he is no longer involved and that he wishes them luck. So I thought that was interesting that he actually had acknowledged that he was involved. And this is the movie that's being directed by Sharmeen Obaid Chinoy. I am definitely not saying that right. I apologize, but she was the director of some of the episodes of Miss Marvel. Justin, as a movie fan, are you excited for these 3 new Star Wars movies that got announced last week?
I don't know. I mean, I'm one of those guys, like, I feel like my enthusiasm for Star Wars at this point is more in the shows.
Okay.
The sequel trilogy did sort of burn because again, there was so much build up to that sequel trilogy. And I mean, the results were at the very best mixed, very mixed results. And so I don't know. Now that, we finally have 9 episodes that, George Lucas sort of typed about, since the 80s kind of thing, and then said, "Oh, I always had plans for 6," and then
Right.
then told Disney, like, "Oh, here are some ideas I have that Disney sort of ignored." But yeah, as I'm sort of burnt out, so for these new movies, I've never not seen a Star Wars movie in the theaters that came out during my lifetime, sort of thing. So I'll check them out eventually, I'm sure. But I can't say I'm like front in line excited about them.
Okay. Yeah, as always I kind of approach this stuff with a cautious optimism, but I can totally understand feeling burned by some of the recent films. By and large, I have enjoyed most of the stuff that's come out in the Disney era. So I think as long as the creative talent behind them are passionate about the project and actually feel like they want to be there making Star Wars, I will always keep an open mind about whatever is still to come. And we'll find out more about this stuff later on, I'm sure. Other stuff that came out this week, some new comics, of course. They're still churning out these Star Wars comics. We had the Nameless Terror in the High Republic #2, Yoda #6, and Sana Staros #3. And I have read and reviewed all of those comics. Those reviews are up on laughingplace.com. Are you a comic fan at all, Justin? Have you read any Star Wars comics?
Not really Star Wars. I mean, I don't know. I hope I'm not like the least rabid Star Wars fan you've ever had on
That's
this show.
absolutely definitely not the case, so don't worry about it.
But yeah, as far as like the comics go, I mean, I'm most interested about Yoda. Does it go in his backstory? Because I know George Lucas would always say like Yoda in specific, he always wanted to keep a mystery. Like,
Right. Yeah, I remember reading that as well. Yeah. So this comic, this Yoda miniseries, there's like a bookend that takes place during his exile on Dagobah, where he's like thinking about his past. And then there's different arcs that we see him flash back to. Some of it takes place before the prequel trilogy, starting to get into a little bit the prequel trilogy era. But yeah, I could see that desire to want to keep Yoda's past more of a mystery. But now that they're doing the High Republic, which takes place hundreds of years before the prequels, and Yoda has been present in that, I think that's kind of gone out the window. Like I think Yoda's past is now fair game. Sorry, George.
what's that film that they announced that James Mangold is directing? Is that
Yeah, so that's going to take place in the dawn of the Jedi era, which is like tens of thousands of years before the original trilogy. And it's basically going to be about the first Jedi, which I am very curious to see what they come up with. That was something that existed in the old expanded universe, in the Legends timeline. There was a whole series of books and comics called The Dawn of the Jedi. I actually own them, but I have not read them. I bought them recently as just to read them because I had never picked them up before. They came out during a period where I wasn't as into Star Wars as I am now. So I'm going to be reading those soon and just kind of thinking about how they may interpret those ideas or borrow some of those ideas, or who knows, maybe they'll come up with an entirely different way to do it. But is that an idea that sounds intriguing to you?
Yeah, I'm sort of intrigued, like, going so far in the like past, like
Yeah.
maybe like it sounded almost like, he was like citing I want, the 10 commandments and
Right.
Ben-Hur as like inspiration. So they're almost like getting into the creation of the Star Wars universe.
Right.
That's sort of interesting. And also I'm interested because the name James Mangold, who I don't know if you know, but he has another Lucasfilm that's sort of coming out.
Oh yeah, you got an indie shirt on. Yeah, I am aware of that. Obviously, excited for that. And this is kind of like a vote of confidence, I think, in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, that Lucasfilm is already handing him a Star Wars film. Of course, I was thinking back to when the Last Jedi was getting ready to come out, and like 3 weeks or a month before the release of that, they announced this trilogy that Ryan Johnson was going to make, which has not materialized, as you know. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just to boost the audience confidence in Indy 5, but we'll find out as we get closer to that. Let's do a quick merchandise roundup for this week. Over on laughingplace.com, you can read articles about a new collection called Star Wars Meets the 90s, which is available on Shop Disney and at the Disney parks. Let's see. Hasbro also announced the Return of the Jedi 40th anniversary Monopoly game. I think this was during Celebration, but I didn't mention it last week. And then from Funko, there are new Biddy Pop minifigures called for A New Hope, for the original film, Star Wars Episode 4, and those are very cute. And then lastly, in Star Wars headlines for this week, we got new posters as well. They've been doing this each week with the release of The Mandalorian Season 3. And the two new character posters that we got this week were IG 12, the modified version of IG 11 that Grogu rides around in, and the Praetorian Guards, the New Republic era version of the Praetorian Guards from The Mandalorian. So you can check those out over on the Star Wars social media page. We've also got them at laughingplates.com. Okay, that's Star Wars headlines. Let's get into our main topic for this week. And this is, I feel like we have a lot to talk about here. This is Mandalorian Season 3 finale. It's called Chapter 24, The Return. Before we get into this specific episode, I always like to ask my guest, Justin, what is your overall relationship with The Mandalorian? And what have you thought of Season 3 before this episode?
Well, I guess we could just go back to those mutual friends of ours. Richard and Sarah of Skywalking Through Neverland.
Yes.
November 12th, 2019, Disney launched their little streaming service, Disney Plus. They actually had a viewing party of the very first episode of Mandalorian, and I can actually be heard on their podcast because I was invited and got to go. Have you ever been to Richard's house?
I have not. I have also been invited to their house, but the timing didn't work out. I'm sure I'll get there eventually.
Okay, well, for the listeners out there who don't know, Richard and Sarah of Skywalking Through Neverland, at their house, they have a very impressive collection of Star Wars memorabilia. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure, a lot of people listening to this show, and I know you do, Mike, have a good Star Wars memorabilia, but Richard stands out. He has the cardboard cutout of C-3PO with C-3PO's, this breakfast cereal.
Yeah.
Yes, they actually had a breakfast cereal called C-3PO's. I mean, he actually has Han in frozen carbonite hanging on his door. Like, he has a pretty impressive collection. Like, you pretty much have to go to San Francisco to Rancho Obi-Wan or the other ranch at San Francisco, the big one, the Lucasfilm Ranch, to find a collection that tops Richard's. But yeah, I mean, so basically, it was the whole idea. I got to, it's fun to go to his house, see all that stuff. I brought someone who I was dating at the time, and yeah, we were going to see this new show. And, I was all over Disney Plus that day. Like, I got up like at 5 o'clock in the morning, like to sort of see all the contents, but I avoided seeing that first episode of The Mandalorian until I got to their house. And yeah, I mean, it was a blast. I mean, the date I brought, said it was like one of the best things we ever did was seeing that episode at Richard and Sarah's house. Nice. And I was sort of hooked on the show from day one. And, it's not really saying anything new to say, like, The Mandalorian, like that, the Star Wars fandom, especially since Disney took over, has had some mixed results, but like, that show, especially that first season, sort of united the whole fan base. Like, everybody loved that show. I think a large part of it is that we had been waiting for like a Star Wars live action TV show for, I think, forever. Like, it's kind of weird. Like, Star Wars was so big for 40 plus years, and it took us 42 years to get a live action show. We had animated shows, of course, but we never had a live action show. Compare that to Star Trek, which started off as a TV show, got movies, and then they got a new TV show sort of thing. Like just never got a show. And, it was almost everything we wanted. Like, I feel like, yeah, it had its fan service, but, like, TV shows by their nature, like, they can get away with more repetition easier than movies can, I feel.
Yeah.
And that show, again, it sort of took like bits of like the old trilogy, like from Star Wars, it took like bits and it sort of reinterpreted in a new way. So it was like a Western show. Like, so in other words, yeah, it sort of brought, took, pretty much like the imagery, the classic imagery, and then presented it in this new way. And so, yeah, I was hooked on Mandalorian from day one, November 12th, 2019. saw every episode, catch up with it. Yeah, and I agree with the consensus. Season 1 was great. I liked season 2 a lot. I mean, that was sort of the start of when you heard some negative, like the reception was positive, I remember, but there were starting to get some people saying, that there were some complaints, mostly that Dave Filoni was sort of pigeonholed, like he was a little too obsessed with introducing, like he was indulging in converting his animated characters into live action,
Right.
and some people found that to be annoying. Like that's kind of another one of my blind spots is the animated shows. So,
Mm,
I didn't mind like seeing Bo Katan or Ahsoka in the show. Like to me, it was like, hey, it's all new. At least they're not literally repeating the plot of A New Hope. Okay,
right.
sort of snide on JJ. I don't know. Yeah, I thought, I really enjoyed season 2. Like I just remember that first episode of season 2 with the crate dragon, that
Yeah.
that's how you do fan service right, in my opinion. It's like you do something like that was in the first movie, but we had never really seen the crate dragon in person in a live
Mm,
action film before that.
yeah.
That to me like sums up like why the Mandalorian works. It's that, yeah, it didn't necessarily like invent like the wheel or new characters, but it took bits of Star Wars and then really fleshed out in something that was new, which is what George Lucas always envisioned Star Wars. It was basically Flash Gordon without the copyright kind of thing. He took, bits of pieces of great Hollywood classics, as well as some, Saturday matinee serials and stuff, combined them, and then gave us something new we'd never seen before. And The Mandalorian, I think, lived up to that. Season 3, I like some things in it. There have been, some things. I think some people online are a little too harsh on it.
Uh-huh.
My general opinion on like season 3 as a whole is that it is the weakest of the season. I will concede it is the weakest of the 3 seasons of The Mandalorian so far. And I think, I don't know if you want me to just get into this last episode, but my general thoughts are like it was a solid finale. I think it sort of picked it up, but it was maybe too little too late. And yeah, the overall show, like it wrapped up things up fairly nicely because given
Mm,
where the show was at. But overall, I think, yeah, it's not as satisfying as the prior 2 seasons. And that's my
okay.
very broad
All
reaction
right.
to
Well,
the
we'll dive a little deeper into that in a minute here. But the first thing I kind of want to talk about is going back to last week's episode because I watched that episode at Star Wars Celebration in a big crowd. It was a great experience, as it always is when you see it, in a big room with a bunch of Star Wars fans who were really enthusiastic about it. I loved it. Um, I gushed about it on the podcast. We talked about it there at while we were still at the convention. We had we went to a couple after parties and everybody was buzzing about that Mandalorian episode. But there was this one kind of sticking point that carried over to this week where I was entering into this week's episode with this expectation that we would get this explanation for the title of last week's episode, which was The Spies Plural. Now there was a definitive spy at the beginning of last week's episode, the Elia Kane character, I believe that's her name, who is working. She's working with the New Republic, but she's also reporting back to Moff Gideon. She was a spy. We didn't know who the Spies Plural were.
Yes.
Um,
So was it
now,
referring to those people that Moff Gideon was having a council with? Those were the spies?
I mean, at this point, your guess is as good as mine, which is kind of what I was going to ask you. I did see a theory on Twitter that had me scratching my head, but I was like, well, how was I supposed to know that? Somebody pointed out that it may be a biblical reference to this thing called the 12 spies, that I think it was the Israelite people um, checking out some plot of land or something where they were going to make their new home. And that corresponds to what the Mandalorians were doing when they returned to Mandalore to see if it's safe for them to live there and take back the planet or whatever. And if that's the case, fine, it's a biblical allegory. I get that. But I don't know. I mean, I guess you have to be pretty well versed in the Bible to know that. I don't know, but what are your thoughts, Justin, on this whole thing? Do you think it was Gideon's like hollow conference that they were referring to?
Well, I sort of looked, I rewatched this week's episode, but I also rewatched a little bit of last week's episode 2 to keep, for this discussion. And I figure, yeah, that's what it has to be, because, what else could it really be? Like, are the Mandalorians, like, they're not really spies per
Right.
se. So, I mean, yeah, and to sort of go back this week's episode, it works as a finale, but of course, inevitably there's building up to other seasons. So, and of course, the question I'm sure we're going to be talking about is, for a season 4 of The
Yeah.
Mandalorian, what would you do? And I imagine what you can do is get some of those spies, those people he was talking to, and then maybe have them be, if not a villain, if not for a whole season, certainly for an episode, maybe have each one of those characters expanded.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. Yeah, I mean, we knew Hux's dad was one of them, so we kind of knew who he was, and then I think people had identified one or two of the others. But yeah, I would be interested to learn more about them for sure. And we got a comment from Skywalking Through Neverland again. Yes, why the spies? Every other episode title, including the apostate in particular, is not plural, but refers to multiple people within the episode. Good point. Yeah. So ordinarily you'll have like even the title The Mandalorian has now come to refer to several different people, Din Djarin, Grogu himself, Bo-Katan, Kryze, all these other Mandalorians. But then the apostate also was referring to several different people. The foundling, that episode referred to several different characters, and now we got the plural, and it, as far as we know for
Well,
sure, was
because if
one
the
character.
episode was called The Spy, I mean,
Yeah.
there's actually an English word for a pluralize of spies, whereas The Mandalorian, I guess now it's just you can pluralize them and have it be,
Yeah.
Mandalorian, and you're referring to a group of them.
And then My Sunny Saga says, did we know that Elia or Elia, I don't know how to pronounce that, but was a Gideon spy before this episode? Not, we didn't know for sure before last week's episode, but it was kind of hinted at when she was like monkeying with the controls for the mind fuser or whatever that thing was called, the mind melder, and that's not the name of it. But the mind flayer is the name of that device, like in Stranger Things. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's going to remain up in the air until somebody asks Jon Favreau point blank, what did you mean by that? And we'll finally get our answer to that question. So let's get into this week's episode. This is I will say, kind of in response to what you were saying, Justin, and I said this on Twitter, like I watched this at 2 a.m. or I guess it was 1 a.m. when I got home from the Disneyland event on Thursday night. And I was initially kind of disappointed. I was expecting a lot from this episode, and I think this is probably my fault because I should have learned by now not to enter into any kind of Star Wars with my own preconceived notions of what it's going to be. This is the whole problem with like The Last Jedi and people's responses to that movie, I think, because it didn't really live up to what they had in mind. But I don't know. I felt like there wasn't enough in the way of story, and I always feel like I tune out whenever an episode is so action heavy. And this episode is pretty much just one big battle sequence, and that kind of thing doesn't really do it for me. I do think the action was very well directed and well choreographed. Upon rewatching it, I enjoyed it way more, just knowing that it's mostly just going to be action and you have to appreciate it for that. I think my brain always just wants more information, and that's kind of what I'm looking for and kind of what I was expecting and hoping for. And then, all these personal theories that I have that we'll get into in a bit didn't really pan out. And then, yeah, the whole spies thing, I got to admit, that was kind of loaded going into this episode. I was hoping and expecting that they would address that, and it didn't happen. So it kind of left me feeling a little hollow the first time that I watched it. But like I said, I could go back and revisit it and appreciate it more. So you said you rewatched it, Justin. Did you feel like your opinion changed the second time you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, not maybe the general opinion. I will say that like I enjoyed it more the second time I saw it. Let's just
Yeah,
say it that way. Like the first time, you're sort of like I'm eager to see, okay, what happens next, sort of thing. And yeah, the action it is very action driven instead of dialogue driven, as you pointed out. So yeah, yeah, at the first season, you're just sort of the first time watching it, you're sort of enjoying like it just the action goes by so fast, sort of thing that it's sort of like it can be overwhelming. I can see that. The second time I sort of was appreciating like more like now I know what happens. I could sort of like focus on the details of the action and like yeah, I did appreciate it even like more the second time. Like
yeah,
so yeah, I don't know if like it drastically like changed my opinion. Like it's not like rewatching, I don't know, 2001, like this doesn't make any sense, and then second time it's a masterpiece. Like I
right.
wouldn't it's not quite like that, not quite
Yeah.
like Blade Runner or another classic science fiction movie. But yeah, I did sort of like enjoy it more.
Yeah, to me, I think it was all about having my expectations adjusted for that second viewing. And just thinking back to the season finales of season 1 and 2, I remember how jazzed I was after watching both of those finales because they were so surprising to me. Season 1 ends with the reveal that Moff Gideon has the Darksaber, which opened up this whole world of possibilities for the show. And season 2 ended with Luke Skywalker showing up and
Yeah,
taking Grogu,
that
which is
that was going back, that was a really exciting, like, I did
yeah,
even talk, a little bit with Richard and Sarah. They had sort of a group chat, I remember that being one of the more exciting, more fun moments of 2020, which was a very interesting year, let's
yeah.
just say. But yeah, that that Mandalorian season 2 was always something to look forward to that year, and that last episode was something special.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that I kind of went into this finale with that same mindset of, "Oh, they're gonna blow my mind again, and we're gonna get some big reveal." I would have settled for just getting to see Grand Admiral Thrawn, which we know he's gonna be in Ahsoka, but just having that
Oh,
tease.
yeah,
Yeah,
since we're talking about the spies, Admiral Thrawn was name dropped. Did we? I'm sure you talked
yes.
about that
Yeah,
last.
he was mentioned at the beginning of last week. I was just kind of hoping that, now that we know who the actor is in live action, that they would choose to show his face, that he would pop up here, especially because they kind of set up this power struggle between Gideon and Grand Admiral Thrawn last week, where Gideon was like, "Well, Grand Admiral Thrawn never pops up or shows up in these hologram meetings, so maybe somebody else should be the one in charge of the Imperial Remnant."
Yeah, I
So
guess you could say that was like a setup that didn't pay off
yeah, yeah.
yet. Yet.
Yet. So I want to just go to a comment here. We got kind of an addendum to what we were talking about before, because I didn't mention also that Elia Kane was also in that scene with Tim Meadows a couple weeks ago. So that also did add to the idea that she was maybe trying to influence the New Republic. But we didn't know that she was a spy for Gideon specifically. So all right. So basically, the adjustment that I had to make was, and this is something that doesn't always click with me in storytelling in general and movies, is that basically the show told us what it was going to do and then did it. I think my brain, maybe you don't think this way, Justin, and maybe a lot of people probably don't think this way, but I am disappointed when I know what's going to happen, when it just plays out the way that they set out to. The Mandalorians show up on Mandalore, they're going to retake the planet, and that's what happens. They defeat the forces of Moff Gideon, and that's there were no twists and turns. I guess that's the kind of thing that I'm always looking for. And when I'm not surprised, I guess the big surprise of this episode really is that there were no big surprises, if you want to put it that way. But yeah, the plot of this episode to me was just, oh, they're there, the Mandalorians are on back on Mandalore, and they're going to retake the planet from the Empire, who have set up this secret base there. And it did that well. Once you know that that's what it's about and that's all that it's going to be about, I think it was well executed. I don't know. Did you have any other like favorite moments or things that you didn't care for in this episode?
I don't know about didn't care. I mean, the closest thing that you could say was a surprise. I don't know, maybe reveal is the right word.
Yeah.
Where this is where we learn that Moff Gideon was like cloning himself.
Right.
Then oh, going back to season 1,
Yes.
we finally know why he wanted to kidnap Grogu. Like, so
Yes.
it in other words, it all came full circle. Like, it almost like, I guess the only like this episode, it felt like we know they're not going to end it like here because Star Wars is too big. The
Yes.
Mandalorian's like their most popular show, but it almost did feel like they were trying their best to sort of wrap it up in sort of a nice sort of arc. Like it feels like the end of a this show. Like it could end here.
Right. So yeah, this is another thing that came up in conversations on Twitter because I had said, "Oh, this didn't have the tease of what's next to come, basically." And yeah, that's another expectations that I entered into it with, and that's probably a mistake on my part. But this does feel, as somebody pointed out on Twitter, this does feel more like a conclusion, not of the Mandalorian as a whole, not of Star Wars as a whole, but of what what this person pointed out was that this was a trilogy of seasons 1, 2, and 3, and this was Return of the Jedi. We got the conclusion. There's a happy ending for Din Djarin and Grogu. Their adventures will continue, but as of this moment, they have this nice idyllic ending. Would you agree with that read of this finale?
I never really thought of it that way, like about, comparing it to the original trilogy, but it's interesting. Does that mean season 4 is gonna be the Phantom Menace? We're gonna get, you know, Gungans and
Right.
politics.
maybe maybe that might very
We
well be the
finally
case.
get your dialogue-driven Star Wars content, Mike. It's season 4. You wanted less action.
Yeah, I want more talking. I guess that's what Andor is for the talking, right? So I did want to mention this episode was directed by Rick Famuyiwa. He has directed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this would be his 6th episode of The Mandalorian, and I think he's proven himself to be one of the stronger directors of this series. But as a film fan, Justin, what sticks out to you as a talent that Rick Famuyiwa is bringing to this show? What makes his style click with what they're going for in The Mandalorian?
I would probably have to like go back and rewatch every episode he did to like, sort of say, oh, that's a particular like style that he brings. But
Yeah,
I do think he's good at action, directing action.
right,
I think he keeps it, there wasn't a ton of like comic relief in this. Like I feel like maybe some of the other directors, like, they sort of go to, maybe Grogu's cuteness a little bit too much, or maybe they go for the slapstick a little bit. He sort of focuses, I feel like, on like the actual story, maybe, like, and like gets to the action.
right. Yeah, the action is very well directed. Thinking back to his first episode that he directed was episode 2 in season 1, and that was called The Child. It was the one that has the big
Yeah.
chase sequence with the Jawa sandcrawler, which is still one of my favorite action scenes from all of The Mandalorian. So definitely a good action director for sure, and he was the right choice for this two-part finale, I would say. A couple other big things I want to talk about. So I actually want to kind of admit that I was wrong about the armorer, because this has come up a few times in this podcast. I've talked about it on Twitter. I talk about it in my personal life. I just kind of wander the streets of Burbank, yelling that the armorer is a villain, that she's going to turn out to be the big bad. And I think I can maybe definitively say that I was wrong now, and that's not the direction they were going, which was very surprising to me. I thought for sure that was going to be the twist, and I was wrong. So apologies to the armorer, apologies to John Favreau. You really uh you pulled the rug out from underneath me on that one. But my wife pointed out that it actually might be more interesting that these two groups of Mandalorians were able to put aside their differences and work together. I don't know. I wasn't expecting it to go that smoothly. I don't know. Did you have that inkling, Justin, that the Armorer and the Children of the Watch would be perceived as wrong or trying to take power from Bo-Katan or anything like that? Were you surprised that they were able to join forces so smoothly and successfully take back the planet with no real hiccups along the way?
Well, I guess, if we want to go like what were my issues with season 3? Like why wasn't it living up to the previous 2 seasons? Like why wasn't it as good? Maybe a reason is that like I kind of feel like they didn't have it focused on the plot as much. A lot of
Mm,
side stories. In hindsight, maybe it was a mistake to have, the Book of Boba Fett be the season The Mandalorian 2.5 where they
right.
had like I feel like maybe they should have like started out with that, incorporate it in season 3 and then maybe like the real story of season 3 is the Mandalorian taking Mandalore back.
Right.
Like that's the plot. And I feel like like I'm going online, a lot of people I don't think really grasped that till episode 9. Like it took that long because again, there were sort of many side stories sort of thing. People are like, where is this heading? And it's sort of episode 9 where people are like, okay, this is, we've seen, the show has seen Din Djarin reteam with Grogu. He's now they're together again. Grogu has decided to follow his dad, and he's turned down his opportunity to be a Jedi. Now it's all about the Mandalorian, the community, the like taking back Mandalore and sort of rebuilding the base that was sort of destroyed at the end of season 1.
Yeah.
So in other words, that's sort of the story. But if people are waiting to like the second to last episode to find that out, like, oh, so that's sort of the story. I think there was sort of an issue. So yeah, it does feel like maybe a little too quick that like, yeah, these two sides were able to work together and sort of overcome the last episode. I mean, if that was a little more scattered out this season,
Okay.
maybe if we didn't like have that, the 6th episode where, that was a whole other plot entirely of like the droid malfunction and all
Yeah.
that. If we sort of took that out, maybe if we sort of stretch the story a little more and sort of sent a signal to the audience, okay, season 3 is about the Mandalorian rebuilding sort of, retaking Mandalore and sort of rebuilding the thing, the community. I think it would have been better embraced. I think like maybe people would have had a clear idea of like where this plot was going, and yeah, maybe had more fun with like the two sides not getting along. Instead,
Right.
it works out perfectly at the end, and then it's over. It's like okay,
Right. I mean, I guess they had that chess game or whatever they were playing on the ship
yeah,
last week where they had an argument about the rules, but that was really the only real conflict that they had. Skywalking through Neverland said they were wrong too, but glad. Yeah, that glad because it was awesome. And I agree. Yeah, just seeing again on the rewatch, I was really able to appreciate the moments where the Armorer and Bo-Katan are flying around with the jetpacks, and she's got the Darksaber, and they're going into battle together. It was pretty awesome to see them teaming up in that way. This brings us to a great segue to talking about the Darksaber, because this is another big kind of plot point. This I would call this a surprise in this episode because the Darksaber was crushed. It was destroyed by Moff Gideon with his robot Dark Trooper suit. And I guess my question to you, Justin, what do you think this means that the Darksaber is destroyed? To me, my interpretation is they don't need it, right? The interpretation is that the Darksaber was the symbol. You couldn't rule Mandalore unless you had the Darksaber, but the lesson that we're supposed to take from this is you don't really need that as a symbol. I don't know. What was your read on that moment?
I think that's a good interpretation. I mean, you could say to a lesser extent, it was similar to the end of The Last Jedi, where they were,
Yeah.
that whole end was supposed to be you don't really need to be like taught the like you don't really need the like the master the apprentice thing. Like basically the force, can be to everyone. It's not just limited to the Jedi and the Sith. And maybe that's what they were trying to do on a much much smaller
Right.
scale with this, the Darksaber got destroyed. That now that apparently with the two sides working together, I mean, apparently even like having your helmet be on at all times isn't even quite the damning thing that we thought it was.
Right. Yeah, that was I'm still adjusting from that idea that but this is I guess it's more about the armorer's arc that she is able to accept that there are other versions of Mandalorian beliefs that are equally as valid and move on and be able to work with the other Mandalorians without insisting that everyone has to keep their helmet on. But yeah, I keep going back to the interview I did with the composer, Joseph Shirley, early in the season. I think it was after episode 2 or maybe 3 of this season. And he said the whole idea, the whole theme of this season of The Mandalorian is people putting aside their differences and working together, which if I had really thought about what he said, I would have probably had a different theory about the armorer being a bad guy, because he was basically spelling out the ending for me there without any real spoilers. But yeah, I think when you mentioned The Last Jedi, I thought about this other thing I wanted to point out, which is we got almost like a mini version of the Holdo maneuver in this episode, where Axe Woves, one of the Mandalorian characters, goes up and he tells everybody to evacuate from the big light cruiser ship that they had stolen from Moff Gideon, and then he ends up crashing that down onto the surface of the planet, destroying the base, the Imperial base, and that ends up being what kills Moff Gideon. But I don't know, were you thinking of the Haldo maneuver at all during that scene?
I didn't really think about the Holdo maneuver.
Okay, yeah, the scene in Last Jedi where
Yeah,
Laura
I
Dern's
know what
character,
it
yeah,
is, but yeah, it didn't cross my mind watching this episode.
yeah. I don't know. I wonder if they were intentionally referencing that, or if it was just a coincidence that I picked up on. But
Yeah, but
other things, yeah. Go
You
ahead.
you are correct that I that's the theme I picked up too. That like I think even Bo Katan like says Mandalorian are stronger together. That's pretty much the big theme of this episode. I mean,
Yeah,
even like Grogu when he's fighting the red storm, the stormtroopers. Like there's even a moment where it's like he falls and like has the thing under, and they're like, "Oh my god, could they get Grogu?" And then the Mando comes and helps him. So even Grogu's not all. They try to say even he's even stronger with Din.
right.
So
Yeah,
like kind of a whole thing they're going is that Mandalorian are stronger together, and that's why they probably wanted to have the two Mandalorian bases join peacefully, have
right.
it wrapped up as quickly as it did.
Yeah, I guess to your point, they spelled out that theme to us by having, at the end of last week's episode, we saw Paz Vizsla go up against the Praetorian guards, and he didn't survive
Yeah.
from that battle. And then in this episode, Grogu and Din Djarin team up to fight them, and they are able to take them down with their combined forces. So yeah, I do agree that is definitely pretty glaringly the theme of this season. So I also wanted to talk about the end of this episode. We get Din Djarin officially adopts Grogu as his child, which many people, yeah, there he is. There's Grogu, and there's Din Djarin is right there. So many people have pointed out already that he was already kind of his child. So my wife keeps saying it's just paperwork. That's the only difference, is they had to fill out the
It's
form.
official.
Yeah, now it's official. But the thing I'm confused about here that I want to talk about with you, Justin, is the new name that Grogu is given is Din Grogu. Now, we've established in the past that the way Mandalorians work with surnames is the same way that you or I would use it, which is, Paz Vizsla is of the clan Vizsla. His ancestors have the same last name, Vizsla. Bo-Katan Kryze, her relatives are also have the last name Kryze. But with Din and Grogu, Grogu has adopted Din's first name followed by Grogu, given to him by the armorer. I don't know. What is your interpretation of this naming convention? Is it just a difference between the two clans? But Paz Vizsla was in the Children of the Watch too. I'm just baffled by this whole thing.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. He like gets the same first name, like Din Djarin and now Din Grogu. I think they were just, they just wanted to establish that yes, he is now Grogu. He is his adoptive son, and that was just like the the quickest way they could think of it. It's like Din Djarin names him Din Grogu. Like so, yeah. I don't.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if they put a ton of thought into it.
I guess so. Yeah, I wonder. Again, it's something I kind of want somebody to ask Jon Favreau. I've never been offered the opportunity to interview him, but I have my list. I'm growing a list of questions if I ever get to talk to Jon Favreau or Dave Filoni
Or
about
maybe you should just try to go to a premiere and like run up to them.
this. Yeah, I'm sure they would love that.
Yeah.
I would get tackled.
Quick side note: I was at the Jungle Book premiere. I had a poster for him to sign, and Jon Favreau actually. This is shows you what a guy he is. He goes down to every person to like
Nice.
sign their stuff. Like he actually really does love the fan. He's appreciative of the fan enthusiasm to like he goes down the list and like signs every last person. So I think the trick is you just need to go to like one of the premieres next movie and
Yeah.
then say have your list of questions.
Real quick, I have a list of 10 questions to ask you. My Sunny Saga says, could it be indicative of blood versus adoption? That's a good theory. I like that. And then Skywalking Through Neverland, they said they're always going to call him Baby Yoda.
Oh yeah.
I don't know about that.
Here's a question. I mean, maybe we'll talk this later if we talk about, the very end, like season 4, whatever sort of thing. But do we ever think when do we think Grogu's going to speak his first words? Because, that's what the head leader of the Mandalorian, like she says, he can't be like he's a foundling, like he can't be an apprentice because he hasn't spoken yet. So now that they've actually addressed Grogu talking, are we ever going to hear Grogu say his first words like, talking I am?
So now you went back and did the Star Wars impression. So it's a good question. I think we have to eventually hear him talk. I guess he could just forever speak in his little goos and gaws and badoos or whatever, but it would be weird if he'd never talk.
Yeah, well, seeing our mutual friends like saying he's Baby Yoda always, from the marketing perspective, I can see why like they would like they're holding off him saying his words as fast. Like my like girlfriend like was a huge Baby Yoda fan. Like she has all the big Baby Yoda things. Like she was really into the Baby Yoda character. She did not love the reveal that his name was Grogu. And then I even asked her at one point, do you think they're ever going to, like he'll talk, they'll say his first words, and she just, did a sort of no, ew, sort of. It's like let's just put it this way. There's a reason the show Rugrats All Grown Up never caught on. From a marketing perspective, people sort of like the idea of like a baby staying a baby for eternity because in real life they don't do that. They grow up. So I can see from a marketing perspective, they're sort of worried like, okay, what's his word, Grogu's first word, Grogu's first word, what's it gonna be? Because I've even said like the joke many times. The first word Grogu's first word should be is merchandise.
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 Yeah. This is why I have cats and not children, because cats will always be cats. They'll always be small. And they will never speak to me without, meows, unless you get those buttons that they can press on the floor to tell you they want food. Anyway, this episode ends with the return of IG-11 as the Marshal of Navarro. It's good to see him again, I guess, and always fun to have Taika Waititi voicing that character. And then Din and Grogu are granted a homestead on Navarro. outside of Navarro City where they can live in between adventures, as Grief Karga says when he gives it to them. And yeah, this kind of brings us to your question that we've already kind of addressed a little bit, but what would a season 4 of The Mandalorian look like? Now, the one thing I haven't really pointed out is season 3 is the first season of this show where we never saw Pedro Pascal's face. He never Din Djarin never once took off the helmet, which I thought was interesting.
So
But
that's
yeah,
a good question. Was Pedro Pascal even in the show? Like, obviously he provided the voice, but
yeah,
I think there was even an interview where he may have like suggested that that's sort of where he wanted to get. Because
yeah.
if you've been following Pedro Pascal, he's been a busy guy recently. He has another big hit TV show, so I can imagine like he wants to provide the voice. I mean, you can't really prove he was under that suit, is all I'm saying.
Well, I mean, they have admitted as much that he's not. There are two actors. Let's see, Brendan Wayne and Lateef Crowder. I think one is more of an action guy, stunt guy, and one is doing the rest of Din Djarin's walking around in the armor. And yeah, by and large, they do play the character on set. But this is just like David Prowse in the original
Yeah.
trilogy with James Earl Jones doing the voice for the most part. But there, as you know, Pedro Pascal has been on set and has performed the character in person as well. Not this season, it seems. But I guess the question going into season 4, if and when there is a season 4, Jon Favreau has said that he's written a season 4, so I think we're expecting one. But so my assumption, again, going into it with an assumption, which is probably a mistake, is that Din Djarin's arc would be accepting that he can remove the helmet every once in a while, which does not seem like that's the direction that they're going. I don't know. What do you think?
Well,
What
they
do you think the path is? Yeah,
arguably you could say he sort of had that arc in season 2.
right. But then he immediately like does a 180 and wants to redeem himself and puts the helmet back on and has not removed it since.
Which
Uh,
why why those two sides of the Mandalorian getting along so well sort of
yes,
seems a little weird.
right. So now you would think he kind of does have the freedom to remove the helmet, but has not. And Grogu, when he becomes the apprentice, is not given a helmet,
Well,
which I believe,
yeah,
yeah,
he's not an apprentice. They make
right.
that clear. He's just his adoptive son for now.
Okay. So he has to still work his way up to that, I guess.
Because she specifically says, because he can't speak, he is a foundling still.
Right. Okay. Now, yeah, I guess I was a little confused about that.
Yeah, they would have done that whole ceremony they did for
Right.
the little kid, but again, he's still too young, and of course, young is like 50 years because he's alien kind of thing. So it's Grogu math, like he's
Yeah.
young in Yoda Grogu years.
I guess to counter that though, I would say he does call him his apprentice when he shows up at the bar. When they go to Adelphi base and talk to Carson Teva at the end, he says that Grogu has become my apprentice.
He's
Um
the dad. I mean, technicalities,
yeah.
apprentice in his heart.
My Sunny Saga, I think this is Rebecca, by the way, said that Mando has his helmet and Grogu does not. So they walk both worlds side by side. That's a good point too. So yeah, they have in that clan of two that they still have, they have representatives of both ways of being a Mandalore. So yeah, it's a nice, very tidy ending that I was not expecting. But yeah, anything else that you would want to see or would expect to see from more further adventures of the Mandalorian and Grogu?
Well, I mean, he does have that moment where, he introduces, I forget the name of the character, the New Republic
Yeah,
guy.
Carson Teva is his name.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he basically is asking for missions, and
right.
then he's like, "That's not really legal," and he's like, "Think about it. You've already done," sort of thing. And so, in other words, I guess they're gonna. It almost seemed to me that they're gonna the next season's going to be maybe even more episodic because again this wraps things up so well that it almost like it's almost like Favreau and company sort of want it to be more of an episode to episode. They don't want it to be as serialized where you have to like watch it from like a whole season arc, because the whole Moff Gideon thing, that's been wrapped up. His clones
Right.
are all dead. As far as we know, there's no clone that survived. And
Right.
I'm guessing, Giancarlo Esposito, he's also a busy guy. He's got a new AMC show. So I'm thinking maybe it's a case of that he does, he's kind of ready to move on. He I'm sure he loves, this opportunity and working on the show. But yeah, he's probably eager to be out. So he's gone as the villain. So the question is, do they have, maybe they can have it more like that, those first 3 episodes of The Mandalorian in season, all the way back in season 1, sort of teased, where he was just a gun for hire.
Yeah.
He worked all these little missions for Carl Weathers, sort of thing. And we never did see, I still want to see that episode where he goes to the Akbar thing, like he
Oh, right.
sabotaged that mission to save the baby. I would like to save the baby.
I think it was implied. I'm not 100% on this. I think it was implied that Mon Calamari
Calamari.
that was on that bounty puck in the beginning of the first season turned out to be the one that we saw a couple weeks ago. That was like the star-crossed lovers with the Quarren squid face one, and those other Mandalorians, the ones that were working as like independent contractors, showed up to collect the bounty on him. I think that was the implication, that those two were connected. But yeah, the other thing that
Din Djarin's actions, Christopher Lloyd's character was doing a lot more damage and getting further.
Right.
So way to go, Din. Yeah, sure, save the baby.
Baby. The other thing that they could follow up on, and I think they will eventually follow up on, is the mythosaur, which we didn't mention yet. They did have that moment at the end of this episode where Grogu kind of peers into the living waters, and the camera like zooms down through the water, and we see the mythosaur open its eyes. So they do have that connection. We know that Grogu is capable of communing through the Force with, giant animals, as we saw in the Book of Boba Fett with the Rancor.
Well, let's talk about season 3, the episode 1, where Grogu looks out, and was that a mythosaur?
So those are Purgle. This is as you haven't seen the Star Wars Rebels animated series. They are basically like big space whales that can travel through hyperspace, and that's what Grogu was seeing while he was traveling in hyperspace. Again, another of Dave Filoni's animated creations that got brought into live action.
Yeah, but I was just thinking about that episode and this episode. You could also say, it's sort of, again, Grogu's sort of away with nature. It sort of wraps things up with the season. Like it started out, and then with sort of mystified, and now he's becoming this apprentice, and like, there's this mythosaur little, because just on the context of its own, it's like, oh, that shot of mythosaur, that's sort of random, like, but maybe it just comes full circle when you look at it, the season as a whole.
Yeah, I thought for sure, again, this was one of my expectations. I thought for sure the mythosaur would be a bigger part of the finale, but just having that one shot, I think, is setting up more, because we've heard about this character. I think it was Tar Vizsla, one of the ancestors that was the first Mandalorian who also became a Jedi. They've told this story on the show. I think it was in Book of Boba Fett, actually, that the armorer talked about him. And I think the implication to me at that moment was Grogu is going to be the next Mandalorian who could also be a Jedi. So that's my theory of the direction that's going in. The other thing that they could be setting up with this joining, working for the New Republic, is maybe an appearance in Ahsoka, because we know that the crew of the Ghost is going to be in Ahsoka. They've announced the actors for Hera Syndulla and Sabine Wren, so they have a connection to the New Republic, I'm sure, having fought in the rebellion. I don't know. Do you think we'll see Mando and Grogu this August when Ahsoka starts?
I wasn't anticipating for it, but when you pointed it out, I mean, it's possible. They love cross, referencing. They love cameos and all that.
Yeah.
Again, the Boba Fett show became the
Right.
Mandalorian season 2.5 and a half. So I don't think they'll do that for Ahsoka, but I could totally see like a cameo situation.
Maybe one episode would be enough, I think.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to say about The Mandalorian, either season 3 or the finale, or as a whole, as a series, before we move along here, Justin?
Well, I think one thing in your notes we didn't really cover, R5, let's give
Oh
some
yeah,
love to R5. I just remember the prequel trilogy, his head getting dismantled by the buzz droids, and
right.
so I was glad to see him get some heroic status. Go R5. And as far as like the overall show, though, I love the last shot. Again, it sort of
Yeah,
goes. This almost feels like the end of the Mandalorian. I mean, it's not
yeah,
really, I can't imagine it, but it feels like this story, like this whole story, could end here if they wanted it to. Because
yeah,
like I just think like, how is it gonna be better than that last shot of Din Djarin, he's sort of posed in this Western sort of pose with sort of his crossway, and they're sort of like on a little house on the planet kind of thing, and
yes,
then there's like Grogu, it's a shot of like Grogu playing. It's like, again, the only way you sort of like grow and develop this is, we talked about Grogu speaking, him actually like saying his first words, which might go in the be problematic in terms of the marketing, but or we have something even more drastic and shocking, like, I don't know, Din Djarin dying, which again, that would, and then the Mandalorian can be Mandalorians as a whole. But again, do they really want to do that? I mean,
yeah.
so it almost feels like this last episode, it's almost like the most picturesque ending for the show you could ask for.
Yeah, in fact, that's a great point because I love, first of all, going back to the Western roots, which we know are, Star Wars is deeply rooted in the Western genre. But then we got that fun little iris out that,
Yeah.
it zooms in on Grogu with the frog and then continues, and we get the complete iris out to black. But when I watched that episode with my wife, she turned to me and asked me if that iris out, that very specific framing composition, was a reference to some movie somewhere, which it could very well be. But my response was, I don't know. It did not jump out to me as anything specific. But as a movie fan, did you pick up on any homage to a movie that you have seen with that ending shot?
I don't know if like that exact shot. I mean, yeah, I mentioned like he has sort of like a pose like sort of thing. Like, we've seen, I'm sure, a lot of cowboys sort of in that pose. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie My Darling Clementine, the John Ford movie.
I have not seen it. I've definitely heard of it.
Yeah, like I think like the cover, like he's sort of like leaned back and like has his legs crossed, kind of like the Mandalorian is now, just like
Okay.
the Criterion cover. But yeah, I was also wondering if that was a movie. I couldn't like, again, it's more a general feel of a Western than maybe referencing any one specific movie. But
Okay.
I totally got what they were going for.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if somebody out there might make a connection to something specific. Otherwise, yeah, probably just a general cinematic homage to the Western genre. Okay, I think that's a great place to end our discussion of The Mandalorian season 3, and we'll go into our final segment here on Who's the Boss, which is called First Steps into a Larger World. This is where we talk about the media that we've been consuming and or enjoying outside of Star Wars. My example this week is another movie that I watched last week on the plane back from London. This is a documentary called Val, which I had been meaning to check out for a while, and it's all about the life and career and recent illness of the actor Val Kilmer, who has some Lucasfilm connections. As you know, he was in Willow. So yeah, if you're interested in behind the scenes of the film industry, first of all, he the great thing about this documentary is that Val Kilmer was an early adopter of the VHS camcorder. So he says in the movie he had been one of the first owners, like, because he was an actor, he was successful around that time, and he bought a camcorder in the early 80s. So you have all this footage that he shot himself of behind the scenes of all these movies that he worked on, which is a great resource for them to build this documentary around. And then you also find out about his personal life and unfortunately the illness that sidelined his career a few years ago. So I really enjoyed this documentary. I would highly, highly recommend checking it out if you're whether you're a fan of Val Kilmer's or not. If you're at all interested in the ins and outs of what it is being like a working actor in Hollywood, I think that this would be a great thing for you to check out. So that's my recommendation for this week. How about you, Justin? Have you read anything, watched anything, played any games lately that you would like to chat about?
Well, in the movie theaters, I saw Air, the movie about Nike
Oh
slash
yeah.
got the deal with Michael Jordan. We don't
Mhm.
see Michael Jordan. That was a really good movie. Even if you're not really into sports, into the history of Nike shoes, it opens up with sort of a fun 80s montage. There's a lot of great period detail there. And, Star Wars was started in 77, 80. So yeah, it's sort of got it's got great art direction, very slick editing. And yeah, it's an interesting story because, Michael Jordan and Nike is one of the most famous partnerships, marketing deals ever. And, if you're at all interested in sort of learning in more details sort of thing, I would say check that out. That gets a solid B+, 4 out of 5 stars, really good, strong movie.
Yeah, I was interested in that too. There seem to be a lot of these movies or miniseries lately that are about like corporate, the history of corporation. Like there's that Tetris movie, or is it a docu series or something? Or
Something I want to check out, but I haven't gotten around to.
yeah, so the Nike thing, yeah, I was curious about that too. So that's a good one, good recommendation. Skywalking Through Neverland said they loved Grease: Rise of the Pink Ladies. I think that's on Paramount Plus.
Yeah,
So
and
that's a good one.
if you have Netflix, it was just Tuesday. They finally added season 6 of Better Call Saul, which Better Call Saul is one of my favorite TV show. Certainly, the last season, which
Yeah.
was as good as any content I've ever seen. I'm sure you pointed it out last week that we got 2 Breaking Bad actors in
Right.
Mandalorian. We got Giancarlo Esposito and Charles Bader, I believe, who plays Skinny Pete.
Yes, Charles Baker, I think.
Baker,
Yeah.
yeah, he plays.
Um,
But yeah, the final season is on Better Call Saul. Even if you've seen Breaking Bad and not sure you want to check out Better Call Saul, I put it this way: Breaking Bad was maybe the greatest television show ever made, and Better Call Saul was better.
that is a great way to put it. I've said about Better Call Saul in the past that it was simultaneously the best prequel ever and the best spin-off ever. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of the whole Breaking Bad universe. And love, love, love Better Call Saul. So definitely agree with you there. Don't forget, we've also had Bill Burr on The Mandalorian too,
Oh,
who is
of course. I mean, he's on Breaking Bad, but yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Great, always great to see those actors popping up in other places. Okay, that's going to bring us to the end of this week's episode of Who's the Boss. I really want to thank my guest, Justin. Justin, I can't believe I haven't had you on before because you have a lot of wonderful thoughts. So definitely we'll be doing this again. But thank you so much for coming by and chatting with me about The Mandalorian.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be on Laughing Place TV. I got a history with Laughing Place. I mean, I remember covering the 24-hour Marvel marathon or
Oh
29-hour
yeah,
Marvel marathon back in 2015. So
nice.
if you want to read some of that article and a few others I did, I worked for them for about a year. So
Cool.
I think I actually I guess you could say I had your job before it became your job, sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I stole your thunder at
Oh,
all.
no,
This
no
happened
worry.
way before.
I put it this way, I'm like the VHS beta tape to your Blu-ray player.
I'm not quite 4K, but I'll be a Blu-ray. Yeah. No. And then where can people find you if they want to track you down, Justin?
Well, we mentioned my podcast, which I'm appreciative for the plug. Downtown Toon Pod on Twitter, Downtown Toontown on Instagram. I have a Facebook page too. So you could check out Downtown Toontown, the podcast. I'm really grateful you mentioned the Glendale International Film Festival. I don't think I'll be involved this year as much as years past, but yeah, always support the festival. Try to support your local film festivals. It's a great way to support young and upcoming non-voices and non-franchise films. I mean, movies outside the studio system, and a great way to do that is film festival. And the one in Glendale is certain, we're a nice small little festival, always looking to look bigger, but yeah, check out the local film festivals. And that's pretty much what I've been doing. Yeah, I have an Instagram page too, JJ Smith Media Entertainment, if you want to follow that.
Awesome. Thanks so much for everything, for all your thoughts today and your time. I also want to thank Jordy Pabletti for helping me to set up the special guest caller that we had earlier in the episode. Again, you don't know who that is unless you've listened to the audio version. Next week on Who's the Bossk, I'm actually going to be taking a week off, a very well-deserved week off, I think, because we've done a lot on this show lately with everything building up to Celebration. And now that Mando's over, I'm going to take a break. But I'll be back on May the 4th with a new episode that was recorded actually earlier this year. So look forward to that. Next episode will be May the 4th. And then, as always, please visit laughingplace.com for all your Disney news and opinions. And I'm on Twitter as well at Who's the Bossk Pod. My name is Mike Celestino. Thank you so much out there for listening. See you next time. Bye. Let's end the broadcast.